King Charles and Prince William have shared a private moment before participating in the Order of the Bath service. His Majesty was seen gently patting his son on the arm when they greeted.
As King Charles's health declined, a hidden emotional storm hit the palace. His final heartbreaking wish, a personal request, not a state order, reportedly caused Prince William a major breakdown. This unexpected request about Princess Catherine's future role deeply unsettled the royals. Get ready to learn the details of this surprising instruction and the huge personal weight it put on the next in line for the throne. The heavy crown and the quiet end. The crown had only been on King Charles's head for a short time. He had waited for 73 years, making him the oldest king to ever start ruling Britain. He had prepared for this job his entire life, and his time as king was just starting. People still remembered his first speech as king, where he shared his sadness about his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and proudly named his son, William, the new Prince of Wales. It seemed like everything would continue smoothly, just as it always had. For the very first time, the meeting where he officially became king, called the Accession Council, was shown on television, showing that this was a modern royal family. King Charles even showed he cared about new things, like saying that money made from wind farms should help all the people, not just the royal family. He gave speeches in Germany and France, and he talked about difficult parts of history when he visited Kenya. He was becoming a king who had his own voice and knew what he wanted to do. But a sadder story was starting to unfold, like words written in invisible ink that no one could see. People started to whisper in the hallways that his time as king might be one of the shortest in Britain's history. Why would they say that? It was because he was fighting a secret battle inside himself, a fight that no cameras saw and no news reports mentioned. He was fighting for his life. The news about his health first came out in January 2024. The palace said he was having a corrective procedure for an enlarged prostate, and they said it was a normal thing and nothing to worry about. But inside the palace walls, the real story was much more serious, like a snake hidden and ready to strike. During that normal treatment, the doctors discovered something else. They found cancer. It wasn't related to the first problem, and it was growing quickly and was very scary. This news shocked the family deeply. It was a reminder that even kings could get sick and die, even King Charles. Prince William watched his father, the king, who he called Papa, suddenly seem weak and unwell. The man who was supposed to teach him how to be king was now struggling just to breathe. King Charles, always trying to do his duty, tried to keep working. He still received his official papers in red boxes and signed documents because the work of a king never really stops. But the sparkle in his eyes, the smartness he was known for, started to fade. Queen Camilla, who was always by his side, became like his shadow. She started to speak for him and appear in public for him more often. She went to the Commonwealth Day service and led the Royal Maundy ceremony. She was very strong, but it was very hard on her too, and that's a story people don't often hear. We will talk more about how brave Queen Camilla was during these difficult times later, because she was a quiet hero. There were moments when it seemed like things might get better, but these were like false hopes. At the Easter service in March 2024, King Charles looked a little better. He was maybe a shadow of how he used to be, but he was there. Everyone felt a little bit of relief, but it didn't last. In April 2024, he slowly started to do some of his duties again, and the official news said he was steadily improving. But these were either lies or just desperate wishes. The winter of 2025 arrived, and it was a cold and sad time. In March, things got worse. The cancer, which wouldn't give up, started to take over again. He had to go back to the hospital, and more of his planned events were canceled. Every time something was postponed, it felt like another bit of hope was lost. Prince William could see it, and the whole country could feel it. The king was slowly fading away. As he grew weaker, King Charles started to think of a desperate and surprising plan. It was a final wish. He thought this wish would make sure people remembered him in a good way, but he also knew it would cause a lot of problems for his family. The air in Balmoral Castle felt heavy with things people weren't saying. It felt like ghosts from hundreds of years of royal history were walking through the halls, reminding everyone of how royal families had been made and broken in this very same castle. April came, and it was a difficult month. The king had to stay in his rooms, and the Scottish countryside outside his window looked gray and sad. He had almost no strength left, and it was hard for him to say even a few words. The strong man who used to climb mountains and passionately support important causes was now very weak, like only a whisper of the person he once was. His fancy Savile Row suits, which used to show his great style, now hung loosely on his thin body like clothes that didn't belong to him. The treatments had worn him out, leaving him like an empty shell. Every moment we have with him is important. Someone close to the family, trying not to cry, told a trusted person. We are losing him little by little, and it's painful to watch. Time felt like it was rushing by, pulling everyone towards a scary ending that couldn't be avoided. The talks happening secretly behind closed doors were no longer about running the country or public duties. They were about the end of his life, about who would become king next, and about how the family would survive. The responsibility of the monarchy, with its 1,000 years of history, felt very heavy to everyone in the castle. King Charles had to make a decision before it was too late, and so he asked his sister to come to him. He called for Princess Anne. He knew she was practical and strong, the only one who could handle the difficult thing he was about to ask. She came into his dimly lit room. She tried to look calm, but her eyes showed the sadness she felt inside. The king, propped up with many pillows, his breath making a rattling sound in his chest, looked at her. For a moment, she saw a little bit of the old King Charles in his eyes. He had one last thing for her to do. He wanted her to deliver his last will. It wasn't the official legal paper, but what he truly wanted with all his heart as his final wish. It was a wish that would change the future completely. Princess Anne listened, and her own heart felt like it was breaking. This was more than just a wish. It was like a royal command from a king who was dying, and it would have huge effects. But what exactly did he ask? And why did he choose Princess Anne? The reasons are more complicated than you might think, and we will explore them. The secret wish that caused great sadness for a son. The large main room in Balmoral Castle was very quiet, and a weak, pale sunlight came through the tall, fancy windows, lighting up tiny dust specks that seemed to dance in the heavy silence. Pictures of kings and queens who had died a long time ago looked down from the walls, their painted eyes watching another important event in the Windsor family's story unfold without showing any emotion. The most important members of the family were gathered there, along with their senior helpers and close advisors, all with serious faces and heavy hearts. The only sounds anyone could hear were the quiet whistle of the wind outside and the fast, worried beating of everyone's hearts full of unspoken fears. Princess Anne stood in front of everyone, her usual quick and busy way of acting gone, replaced by a very serious feeling that made the room feel cold. In her hand, she held a single piece of paper, which wasn't an official order, but a summary of what a dying man was asking for. She took a deep breath, and a little shiver went through her before she started to speak. Her voice, which was usually so strong, was now trembling as she told them that the king, her brother, Charles III, had one last wish. This wish was about what would happen to the crown in the future, and it was about his son, William, and William's wife, Catherine. Everyone in the room held their breath, trying hard to hear every word. Princess Anne explained that King Charles wished for Princess Catherine to be named Queen Consort when William became king. But he didn't just want her to be Queen Consort, he wanted her to stand equal next to Prince William, meaning she would be just as important. The word equal seemed to explode in the quiet room, causing everyone to gasp with shock and disbelief, because this was not how things were usually done. It was like a revolution. The fact that the king was very sick and close to death made his wish feel incredibly important, almost like a holy command, not just a simple suggestion. It was clear that this was a dying man's desperate attempt to change the royal family's future. Princess Anne's face showed how painful it was for her to deliver this message, and later she would tell a close friend that it felt like she was tearing down an old sacred temple with her own hands, one stone at a time. The old walls of Balmoral Castle seemed to make a groaning sound, as if they understood how heavy and important this announcement was, and everyone knew that nothing would ever be the same again. And what about William? He was there in the room, watching and listening to everything. He was a prince, a son, and the future king. But in that moment, he felt completely broken. The words, "Queen Consort," "standing equal," hit him very hard, almost like someone had physically hurt him. It wasn't the queen part that upset him, because Catherine becoming queen was something he had always dreamed of, a future they both expected. It was the word equal. That single, powerful word, spoken while his father was dying, was a huge shock. In the complicated and often unspoken rules of royalty, equal meant a massive change. His ability to stay calm, which he had learned over a lifetime of being watched by everyone, suddenly fell apart. It wasn't a big, dramatic outburst, but a terrible, quiet collapse inside him. Overwhelming sadness, raw and uncontrolled, felt like it was choking him. He thought about his father, his papa, who was fading away, and this wish was his last big act. The importance of it, the huge and crushing responsibility, felt like too much to bear. His mind was filled with a storm of thoughts. He wondered about his mother, Diana, and her lonely fight against the royal system, often called the Firm. What would she have thought about this? Would she see it as a sad twist of fate? Or would she feel like it proved her right that things needed to change, especially now that her son's wife was being given such power? And then he thought about Catherine, his beloved Kate. He knew this was a way of honoring her, a sign of his father's love and trust in her. But he also knew it would be like giving her a crown made of thorns, because being equal meant she would face even more public attention, more pressure, and even more danger. He worried if she could handle it, and if he could stand to watch her go through it. The strong walls he had built up inside himself finally broke. A choked sound escaped him, which he quickly tried to stop. His eyes burned, and the room seemed to spin around him. He turned away quickly, a desperate and shaky movement, as tears, hot and impossible to stop, streamed down his face. These weren't the tears of a prince trying to be dignified. They were the tears of a son losing his father, the tears of a husband worried about his wife, and the tears of a man facing a future that suddenly seemed terrifyingly unknown. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with quiet, painful sobs. The future King of England was completely undone, shattered by his father's love, his father's fear, and his father's final, heartbreaking wish. It was almost too painful for anyone to watch the future king in such a state of raw, human sadness. But this was only the beginning of his suffering. He hadn't yet fully understood the enormous impact this wish would have on his future, on Catherine's future, and on their children's lives. The terrible reality of it all was still slowly dawning on him, and the details were much deeper and more significant than anyone could truly understand in that moment. Sad feelings in the old stone halls, a family feeling broken. As Prince William felt his world falling apart, the surprising news of the king's wish spread like ripples through the shocked group of people, and each person thought about the news based on who they were loyal to and what they were afraid of. Queen Camilla stood a little bit away from the others, looking calm and dignified, but you could almost see the pain she was feeling. For many years, she had faced very difficult times, putting up with mean comments from the public, and patiently worked to change how people saw her, finally earning her place as King Charles's most important companion and his loved queen. She had become a symbol of someone who doesn't give up, and someone who loves deeply and steadily. And now this news arrived. Catherine was to be queen, and she would be equal to William. It wasn't that Camilla was jealous because she was too practical and too sure of Charles's love for her to feel that way. But she might have wondered if this meant her own important role was being overshadowed, like a gentle but firm closing of a chapter where her own amazing journey was being put into the past. Her eyes, which usually sparkled with kindness and a smart sense of humor, were now filled with a sadness she hadn't shown before. She might have questioned if all the sacrifices she had made and the quiet battles she had fought and won counted for less in this new situation. Much later, a close friend would talk about Camilla's quiet sadness. This friend reportedly said, "She understood why the king made this wish. She even agreed with the reasons in a way, but it still hurt her deeply. It was as if her own role and the acceptance she had worked so hard to get was being gently but clearly replaced." Queen Camilla, who always tried to be strong and not show her feelings too much, probably wrote down her thoughts in her private diary that night. Her elegant handwriting might have been a little shakier than usual as she wrote, "Change is a part of life. The royal family has to change with the times. But oh, Charles, my dear Charles, this particular change is very painful." She would deal with her sadness privately, and then she would continue to do her duty, just as she always had. Her strength, her quiet suffering, and her never-ending loyalty, even when faced with this new reality, show what an amazing woman she had become. A true queen in her own right, no matter what her official title was. Meanwhile, Princess Anne, after delivering the shocking news, now had to act like a reluctant general, taking charge of managing all the problems that came after. She knew the royal family better than anyone, being the king's sister and William's aunt. But she was also a woman who had strong opinions of her own, someone who respected tradition, but also had a surprising streak of wanting to do things differently. She had made her own way in life, choosing not to give her children royal titles, supporting causes that weren't always popular, and earning respect through her hard work, not just because she was born into the royal family. What did she truly think about her brother Charles' wish? On the outside, she acted like a dutiful daughter of the crown and a loyal sister. She gathered the king's most important advisors, including the Lord Chamberlain, the private secretaries, and the experts on the Constitution. Her instructions to them were very clear. The king's wish was the most important thing, and it had to be carried out. But figuring out how to do it was full of difficulties. "We must respect the past," she reportedly told the quiet room, her voice firm. "But we are not trapped by it. The future needs us to be brave and to make changes." However, privately, whispers started to come from Balmoral that Princess Anne was deeply worried. She wasn't worried about Catherine becoming more important because she admired Catherine, but she was concerned about the way it was happening, about the example it was setting for the future, and about the possibility that it could cause problems and make things unstable. "This is a big risk," she was said to have told a former lady-in-waiting, someone who used to help her. "It's a very big risk, and I truly hope my brother knows what he is doing." The internal politics of the palace, which were always like a complicated nest of snakes with everyone wanting different things and holding on to old arguments, started to stir. There were some people who thought King Charles's wish was a brilliant idea, a way to modernize the royal family that was necessary for it to survive. These people supported Catherine, calling her the people's queen-in-waiting. Then there were the people who preferred the old ways, the traditionalists. They were horrified. Equal? They asked. What did that even mean according to the Constitution? Was this the end of hundreds of years of carefully organized levels of importance? The whispers grew louder, and different groups started to form. The king's wish, which was perhaps meant to make the future secure, had, in the short term, thrown the royal family into a state of quiet but simmering confusion. The very foundation of the monarchy felt like it was being pulled in too many different directions, and people wondered if it would hold together or if it would tear apart. The answer to that question would depend on what happened in the uncertain days to come and on who would lead them through this crisis. A kingdom's heartbeat, a future changed. When the news finally got out beyond the stone walls of Balmoral Castle, it sent a shiver of surprise through the entire country. people learned that King Charles was dying and that his final wish was for Queen Catherine to be equal to King William. The Kate effect, which had long been something the public was interested in a light-hearted way, suddenly became incredibly important. She was no longer just a loved princess, someone known for her fashion, or a dedicated mother. She was now seen as the person who would save the royal family. The amount of pressure on her, which was already huge, became almost too much for any one person to handle. Could any single woman really carry such a heavy responsibility? Most of the public really liked Catherine. They admired her warmth, her grace, and how easily she seemed to connect with ordinary people, and these qualities were seen as very important. But this situation was different. This was a formal and almost desperate declaration of her importance. Prince William, coming out of his first wave of sadness, knew that he had to be her protector. He had to prepare her, keep her safe, and stand with her, truly with her. His father's wish, even though it was delivered in a painful way, was now something they had to face together. They would face it as King William V and Queen Catherine, as partners and as equals. But what did equal really mean for how the royal family would operate day to day? What did it mean for who would become king or queen next, and for the constitutional rules that had supported the crown for hundreds of years? Lawyers and historians worked late into the night trying to figure it out. Princess Anne led the discussions, and her practical way of thinking was like a much-needed anchor in a sea of emotional confusion. The king's wish was not an official law, but the moral power behind it was impossible to ignore. They had to find a way to make it work. The royal family had to change, or it would disappear. It was as serious as that. King Charles, in his last days, had understood this with a frightening clearness. He wasn't afraid for himself, but for the royal family that he had promised to protect. He had seen how public opinion was changing, how people were not as respectful as they used to be, and how there was a growing demand for a royal family that was not just a symbol, but also relevant to modern life. His wish was a desperate attempt from a dying man to make sure the crown would last into the future. He saw in Catherine the kindness, the modern approach, and the popularity that could connect with a new generation of people. He saw in William the stability, the sense of duty, and the connection to their family history. He believed that together as equals, they could create a new path forward. It was a risky decision that came from love. Yes, it was love for his son, his daughter-in-law, and his country. But it was also a risky decision that came from deep fear. His legacy wouldn't be about his short time as king. It would be about this one brave act, this changing of the future. All the charity work he had done in his lifetime, like the Prince's Trust and his efforts to support the environment and young people, were very important. But he knew that history would remember him for this. He would be known as the king who, on his deathbed, tore up the old rules and hoped for a new beginning. The royal family was now at a crossroads, and the path ahead was unclear, like a road hidden in mist. Could William and Catherine handle this huge responsibility? Could they honor the past while also accepting such a radical future? The answer would not only shape their time as king and queen, but also determine if the House of Windsor would survive in the 21st century and beyond. The weight of 1,000 years of history was on their shoulders. The dying King Charles had placed his final desperate bet on them. The whole world watched, holding its breath. The world hears the news. In some countries far away, where the British king or queen is still their leader, the news about King Charles's wish made people feel a mix of things. They wanted to respect what a king wanted at the end of his life, but they also felt they needed to think hard about their own country's rules right away. Some groups of people in places like Australia and Canada, who had wanted for a long time to have their own leaders instead of the British monarch, thought this was a new chance for them. One important leader from Australia, who wanted his country to choose its own head of state, said in a strong way on TV, "If the rules for the king or queen can change so much just because one person wants it, then maybe it's really time for us to pick our own leader, someone who is chosen by us and for us, not just someone whose family has always been in charge or because of what someone says when they are very sick. But on the other hand, many people in these Commonwealth countries who really liked the monarchy thought the king was very smart to do this, and they said that Catherine was like a fresh new hope who could make the connections between their countries stronger and make sure the monarchy stayed important for many more years. Still, the idea of her being equal was a tricky part, like a difficult puzzle that lawyers and smart people were trying to figure out, and they weren't sure if it was just a nice idea or if it really changed how power worked. Back in Britain, the people in charge of the government, especially the Prime Minister who was leading the country, found themselves in a brand new and very tricky situation, and they had to be very careful with what they did, almost like walking on a thin wire high in the air. When they spoke to the public, they chose their words very carefully, saying they felt very sorry for the royal family, and that the king or queen would continue to lead. But in private, they had many urgent meetings because the king's wish had brought up big questions. The country's top lawyer was asked to write a fast report about what queen consort, standing equal, meant for the laws of the land. People wondered if this new title could become official without the parliament, which is like the group of people who make laws, agreeing to it. They also worried if it could change who would become king or queen next in any way, especially thinking about old rules for what happens if a king or queen can't rule when their children are still young. The fact that Parliament had always been important in deciding big changes for the monarchy in the past, for hundreds of years, was a very big deal. So the king's wish, which came from his own strong feelings, had accidentally started a lot of serious thinking about the country's main rules. With all of this important talking happening all around the world and in the government, everyone naturally started to think even more about Princess Catherine herself. She was the person right in the middle of this huge change, but when people saw her, she stayed quiet and looked calm and graceful, even though it must have been hard. We know that William was very upset, and Camilla was quietly sad, but Catherine now had a very special and heavy load to carry. She always knew she would probably become queen consort one day, because that's what usually happened. But being equal to the king? That was something completely new, a job so big that it might feel like it was too much for her. Friends who spoke secretly to a few reporters who knew a lot about the royals said that Catherine was feeling very unsure about herself, but also very determined. They said she was spending many hours talking privately with William, and their talks were not just about what parties or events they would go to in the future, but about how their life together would really work and how they would handle this new idea of ruling together as partners. She also talked a lot with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Middleton, because they had always helped her feel steady and calm. People had often called her the People's Princess, but now that name meant something even bigger and heavier. She wasn't just supposed to be liked by everyone, but she was also supposed to help lead, to be a main part of the monarchy's new future, all while she was sad about her father-in-law and trying to help her husband, who was also very sad. What do you think King Charles's real reason was? Was it love, fear, or a very smart plan? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.